Bonjour à tous et bienvenue sur ma chaîne. Hello and welcome to my channel. So we all know that making mistakes is part of any learning journey. And they even say that a mistake isn't truly a mistake if you learn from it. But what's even better in my book is learning from other people's mistakes, because then you save yourself any potential embarrassment, right? So in today's video, we're going to talk about 10 of the most common mistakes beginners make when learning French. The first one is perhaps the most common mistake amongst very beginners. It is when they want to say how old they are. When saying how old you are in English, you use the verb to be. For example, I am 35 years old. But in French, you don't use the verb être, which means to be, but the verb avoir, to have. So if you wanted to say I am 35 years old in French, you would say j'ai 35 ans. J'ai 35 ans. I am 35 years old. But literally, I have 35 years. Think of it as, well, you have 35 years experience if you want to remember it easier. Number 2. In conversation, people often ask each other, how are you? Comment ça va? Comment allez-vous? Comment vas-tu? How are you? And in English, people usually answer, I'm fine, thank you, or I'm well. Even if that's not true, right? But that's beside the point. And because of that, it's very tempting, especially for beginners, to translate that word for word and simply say je suis bien, which word for word translates to I am well. But unfortunately, that is not what the French say when answering comment ça va. Instead, you need to use the verb aller, which means to go, in the present tense and say je vais bien or je vais bien, merci. I'm well, thank you. I'm fine. Using the verb aller literally translates to I'm going well, and basically it indicates how you feel in general. If you were to make the mistake and say je suis bien, it would actually confuse French people because it's not grammatically incorrect, but it is used to talk about how comfortable you feel in a particular place. So, for example, I might say je suis bien ici, I feel good here. Or je suis bien dans mon lit, I feel comfortable, I feel good in my bed, right? But you wouldn't actually say je suis bien when answering comment ça va, but you would say instead je vais bien. Okay, I hope that's clear. I hope that makes sense. Just remember, if someone asks you how you are in French, remember you need to use the verb aller and not the verb être. Comment ça va? Je vais bien, merci. Et toi? Number 3. Another common mistake is when using possessive adjectives. Now, possessive adjectives are my, your, his, her, etc. in English, right? And in French, they are ma, mon, mes, ta, ton, tes, sa, son, ses, etc. Right? So, in other words, in English, when you have like one word to say my, in French you would have 3, ma, mon, and mes. This is because possessive adjectives in French have to agree with the noun they modify. So if the noun is feminine, and I want to say my, in most cases, I will use ma. If the noun is masculine, I would use mon to say my. And if the noun is plural, regardless of whether it was masculine or feminine, we would use mes, right? So for example, ma sœur, my sister. Mon frère, my brother. Mes frères et sœurs, my brothers and sisters, right? So ma, mon, mes all mean my. Now, where there is room for mistake is if the noun is feminine and it starts either with a vowel or a mute H. So for example, let's take the word ami, which means friend. Now, if my friend is a boy, then no problem. I would just say mon ami, right? My friend. If I'm talking about several friends, I would say mes amis, my friends, right? But what happens if I'm talking about my friend who is a girl? Would I say ma amie? That would be what would follow the logic, right? But no. If the noun being modified starts with a vowel or a mute H and is feminine, you never use ma. You would use mon, even though it's feminine. And this is because it makes it easier to pronounce. So you would say mon ami, even if your friend is female. Number 4. If you're talking about something you do every morning or something you typically do of a morning, even if it's not every morning, don't say dans le matin to say in the morning. Don't translate in the morning word for word, because the French simply say le matin. They don't say dans le matin. Dans le matin, in fact, is actually grammatically incorrect. So you would actually be making a mistake if you said dans le matin. Okay? But one of the reasons people tend to make that mistake isn't just because they're translating word for word. There is actually an expression that uses dans, but instead it is dans la matinée. And you would use that if you were talking about something that was going to happen during the course of a particular morning. So not something that is repeated often, but something that you plan on doing, for example, tomorrow morning, or this morning, in fact. But that isn't habitual, right? So for example, if you wanted to say, I'm going to see her during the course of the morning, I'm going to see her in the morning, you would say, je vais la voir dans la matinée, or je la verrai dans la matinée. Okay? So use le matin if you want to say in the morning and you're talking about something you do every morning or you typically do of a morning, and use dans la matinée if you're talking about something that will happen during the course of a particular morning. Okay? I hope this makes sense. Number 5. When talking about your job title, so when people ask you, what do you do for a living? Qu'est-ce que vous faites dans la vie? Don't use a indefinite article before your job title like you would in English, because in French you simply say je suis and then your job title. For example, if you want to say I am a teacher, in French you would say je suis professeur. You wouldn't say je suis un professeur. Just skip the un, because, well, for whatever reason, in French we don't use it. Je suis professeur, I'm a teacher. Je suis boulanger, I'm a baker. Je suis mère au foyer, I'm a housewife. Okay? No indefinite article in front of job titles when you're just answering the question about what you do for a living. Qu'est-ce que vous faites dans la vie? Je suis professeur. On the other hand, just to make things a little bit more complicated and confusing, in French, you definitely need to use a definite article when talking about things in general, whereas in English, you don't. Things are always opposite between England and France, right? Or English and French. So it seems anyway. So for example, if you wanted to say something like, I like cats, but I prefer dogs, in French, you would say, j'aime les chats, mais je préfère les chiens. Okay? So you would need to use les. Like, literally, it would mean, I like the cats, but I prefer the dogs. Okay? Professions, no indefinite articles in French, but things in general, use your definite articles. Wow. Just do the opposite, to what you would do in English and you'll be fine. Number 7. Another common mistake is when using reflexive verbs with body parts. So reflexive verbs are verbs that describe an action you do on yourself. So for example, se laver, which means to have a wash, right? Well, when using reflexive verbs with body parts in French, you shouldn't use a possessive adjective even. And this is because doing so would be overkill, because basically the reflexive part of the verb already tells you who the action is being performed on. So for example, when you say je me lave les mains, the me already tells you that you're performing the action on yourself. So you wouldn't need to say je me lave mes mains, because that would technically be like giving the information twice. Instead, you need to use a definite article. Je me lave les mains, or je me brosse les cheveux, or even je lui brosse les cheveux. I'm brushing her hair. So just remember, when using reflexive verbs with body parts, the reflexive part of the verb already tells you who the action is being performed on, so you don't need to use a possessive adjective. In fact, you shouldn't. Just use a definite article instead. Number 8. Another mistake people make is to translate the present continuous word for word. But unfortunately, that is a tense that doesn't exist in French. So just to remind you, the present continuous is that verb form that uses to be and then a verb ending in ing to talk about something that is happening at the time of speaking. So for example, I am eating, that's the present continuous. And a common mistake would be to say je suis mangeant, right? But that isn't grammatically correct in French. Instead, what you need to do is use the present tense. So you would simply say je mange, which translates to I'm eating. Okay? Now, if you really wanted to specify that you are literally right in the middle of doing that thing you're talking about, then you can use the expression être en train de, followed by an infinitive. For example, if you definitely want to make it very clear that you're in the middle of eating, then you could say je suis en train de manger. But really, in most cases, people just use the present tense. Number 9. Another difference between French and English, as if there weren't enough already, is to do with the verb visiter, to visit. Now, in English, you can use this verb to talk about a place you visited or to talk about people. But in French, you can only use it when referring to a place. So you can't use it when talking about people you visited, for example. So if you wanted to say I visited my parents, you can't say j'ai visité mes parents, because that doesn't make sense. Instead, you need to use the expression rendre visite. Rendre visite. Where rendre is the verb, so it needs to be conjugated, and visit is actually a noun. Okay? So, for example, j'ai rendu visite à mes parents. J'ai rendu visite à mes parents. I visited my parents. Just remember, visiter in French can only be used in reference to a place. Number 10. When describing periods of time, in English, we typically use the word for. For example, I lived in Paris for 2 years, right? And for typically translates to pour in French. But you can't use pour if you're talking about a period of time. Instead, in French, you need to use the word pendant. J'ai habité à Paris pendant 2 ans. Okay? And this is what you would say if you wanted to say, I lived in Paris for 2 years. So remember, when you are talking about a period of time, don't use pour in French, use pendant instead. J'ai habité à Paris pendant 2 ans. I lived in Paris for 2 years. So this is it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And remember, you can also download the PDF version of this lesson in the description. Thanks for watching. Bye, à la prochaine.